This is our disclaimer. While I am a Cokewell tribal member, I do not speak for the Cokewell tribal government. So I am doing this on my behalf and Reg is doing this on his behalf as individuals. So don't go back and tell people, this is what the Cokewell tribe said. No, this is what Troy Anderson of the Cokewell tribe said. Right? And I wish you would all sign this disclaimer. Don't pay attention to the fine print. But for those of you who don't know us, I am Troy Anderson, Cokewell tribal member. I work on the language of the tribe, anthropology of the tribe. I am co-writing a book with Reg on the Cokewell tribe. And I'm a descendant of two different languages, Milik and Nuea. And Reg here is our resident expert. Now, you may not know that Reg had this title, but this last bullet up here on the slide is that Reg is the archaeologist who has put the most entries into the State Historic Preservation Office database about Cokewell people, so about my ancestors and Justin's ancestors and Zeta. So we have a few Cokewell tribal members in the audience. Gary is another one. I don't see any others. But Reg has been all throughout Coos and Curry County and is the top name in the SHPO database. SHPO meaning State Historic Preservation Office. So you got who we are. So Monit Yas, Sakintai Noth, Diestus, Wally, Adulci, Uniesis Sensanu, Nlue. So I made a short prayer. I said, howdy y'all. And I told you my name, where I'm from, all in Milik or Miligui. So this is the Milik language. This is the language that was spoken right here. So at the time of contact with settlers, the language found at the mouth of the Coquille River is the Milik language. And so I've spent my undergraduate and graduate degrees working on reviving this language starting back in 1986. And it's just one of two primary languages of the Cokewell people. The other prominent one is Nuea. So Nuea has a really interesting background, which we'll get to later. And of course, that's not counting English, obviously. So today, the point is you're allowed to ask whatever. You can ask any question you want. It's your opportunity to find out what you want to know about the Cokewell people. So it's really time for Q&A. And since you're not raising your hands, I'll ask the first question. Where did the Cokewell Indian tribe live? And it's a trick question. These are all trick questions, by the way. We lived on Earth, right? Any claims that we were from a different planet are untrue. The problem with the question is you have to ask whenever you are mentioning something, and we're going to get into a lot of that today. And the way that we refer to ourselves is that we've been around for a very long time. And the term at the first sentence of our Constitution is since time immemorial. So, when is time immemorial? So this is a timeline from 50,000 years ago to present. And so time immemorial is this part of the timeline over here. So everything earlier than 50,000 years ago is time immemorial. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, isn't there archaeological evidence of the people from a different time? And the answer is yes. We do have evidence of people living in this area and finding things that Reg has found and others have found that put us in a time span of evidence from maybe 15,000 years ago up to 150 years ago. So that's thing one. Question two. didn't the Coquel descend from the people who crossed the land bridge from Asia? Yes, we didn't. So for the most part, as you can see from this space model from NASA, and I'm going to click on it, you can see the growth of ice over time. So this isn't us making this up. This is from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory that shows the ice thickness over time from 122,000 years ago up to present. And so this is the time where you find evidence in the Americas of indigenous people when there's no way for them to get from Asia to North America by walking. So the question is, how did we get here? And there are a lot of hypotheses about that. But again, the idea was, maybe even 100 years ago, that the indigenous people weren't here that long. But the longer that we continue to do the research, the longer back indigenous people show up. So, throughout the Americas, 22,000, 25,000 years ago, when the entire ice sheet was blocking the way from Asia. So, back to the question, not the video, although the video is great. When do we have evidence of people pre-ice-free route? And it's this time period in the 10,000 to 50,000 range. So it's super fascinating. Sometimes you hear people called the Clovis people, and that was considered the earliest ancestors of indigenous people. But now we know the Clovis were after this ice blockage. But there's two main languages of the Coquel people, and we do have evidence that half of our ancestors are part of the ones who came over on the land bridge, right? So there's DNA evidence, not evidence for Milik, but evidence for our Nuea ancestry. So if we look at the dispersal of DNA and how it shifts from Asia into the Americas, you can see the genetic ties between the Dene side of our ancestry and people all the way in Yeniseian. So if you go deep into Siberia, the Yeniseian people share DNA and language with the Dene people of the Americas. So you may not know about the dispersal of the Dene languages, but not only was Dene spoken in this region, but it was also Navajo, Apache, and all throughout Alaska and Northwest Canada. And so if you look at these things from a perspective of migrations, the Amerindians in red here are the people who were here before the ice bridge was available. And the people in yellow are the Dene, and then the Inuit are in purple up there. So again, we don't know how the people in red got to North America because it was physically impossible to do by walking. So we update the timeline a little bit here. So we have the pre-ice free people, and then we have the land bridge people. So again, the whole thing is not proven, even though if you asked, 30 years ago, everyone assumed that we came over on the land bridge. So this is science that updates all the time. And so it's very unresolved, which is why we're very fond of saying since time immemorial, because the longer they keep digging, the more they find out more. So that brings us to our next question. So where were Milik speakers 50,000 years ago? Well, the trick question is somewhere here. Now, was Milik the first language of Amerind? Right? So is it the parent language of all the languages that end up being spoken in red? Well, science is continually updated, but we do not know what was going on that long ago. We do know that, 5 generations ago, Dene people came over to the Coquel River estuary 5 generations ago. And we have stories about that. And so if we put the Dene on the timeline, the Dene appearing in the Coquel watershed occurs sometime between 1,000 and 150 years ago. Now, could it be longer? Yes. Can it be shorter? No, because we know when people were actually here. Okay, I think you guys are ready for question 3. Question 3: Who are our most distant in the past ancestors? Lucy, just like yours. So again, where are we from? Right, same as you. Now it just depends how far back you want to go, right? And do you want to go back to time immemorial? Do you want to go back to Amarand, in this map? And the definitive answer is there's no definitive answer. Okay, you guys are ready for question 4. This one I think you're going to get. So this one's less of a trick question. What is this a map of? Now, if I zoom in a little bit, you're going to see that there's these rivers going off in the blue here, these canyons or rivers that go out. But if you were to turn the bigger map counterclockwise 90 degrees, you'd see this. So this is a map of the ocean depths outside of Coos Bay, Bandon, Port Orford, Gold Beach. So yes, this is a map of the ocean floor. And when the ice was super thick, so remember back to our NASA presentation, the sea level was much, 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 much lower. How much lower? 400 feet lower. So imagine draining the Pacific out here 400 feet 22,000 years ago per this model from NASA. And you'll see where the 400 foot depth mark is. So you are here in Bandon, and how far out is that 400 feet deep? So maybe some of the evidence for where our people are as our ancestors is out in the ocean, because they could have lived on the coast, in which case it's underwater. Likewise, we look at the National Centers for Environmental Information under the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. You'll see the depths of the sea out 100 feet deep, 200 feet deep, and so on. And you can see that a lot of this land that if you thought you had oceanfront property 22,000 years ago, it was inland. Okay, question 5. This is a controversial one. The question I get asked all the time, partially because of the way I look, is how much blood quantum do you need to be a real Indian? Well, I can tell you it's more than the King of England. So the King of England is 1/2 billionth of William the Conqueror, who is the person who allows him to be the monarch of Britain, right? So I'm thousands of times more Coquel than the king is related to William the Conqueror. But no one ever asks, King Charles, how much British are you, right? Now, likewise, if you're a Rockefeller, no one says if you're a 6th generation, wait, are you still a Rockefeller? No, everyone just assumes. But, everyone's very curious about how pure indigenous peoples are in the Americas. Well, let me assure you that indigenous people had rules against marrying each other, especially in the same families, but also for marrying people who spoke the same language of that ancestral village, right? So my great grandmother was Nuea or Dene, and she married my Milik Kus great grandfather, and that's because you had to marry outside of your language community. And so she married into a Milik community. and the women moved into the man's village. So, this idea of how much Coquel are you? It's like, well, how many generations back do you want to go? Right? If you want to go 10 generations back, nobody knows. If you want to go back 5, then we have that measure, obviously. So again, where do Coquel people come from? Well, they come from all over. Depending on where you want to check on the timeline of our ancestry. So, in summary, what did we learn? Well, that the Coquel are comprised of the same thing that you are, right? Lucy, like you, but more recently, since time immemorial, Milik or Milik speaking people and, Dene speaking people, the language that we call Nuea, as promised in the flyer. I'm happy to tell you more about Milik, and I will. So why don't we take a brief journey on Milik? The map I'm going to show you. Where was Milik spoken? We don't know, right? So we know where it was spoken at the time settlers came here and recorded the languages. The language of right here was Milik. And the language of Milik was spoken farther south and farther north and farther east. Another way to look at this, though, from standpoints, if you really like maps, this is that political boundary map. So this is what's called an administrative boundary view of North America. But I don't know if you've seen this next map. This is a map of language families of North America. So language families of North America have a very different map than the administrative boundaries. And they actually show some really cool stuff. So again, this is a language family map. So trying to keep the idea of a language family in mind as we move forward. And, why am I showing you this? Well, first off, I think it's interesting. It's like, our grade school kids didn't learn this map. But it's also partially why we have what Milik we have from my ancestors. So back in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, philologists or linguists like Franz Boas felt that indigenous cultures were worth knowing and understanding, which was a radical departure from most of the anthropologists at his time, who felt that Western thought was the evolutionary advancement of peoples. He had a different perspective. He said, well, actually, these people have worldviews that are really, really fascinating and really describe things a lot better for their environment than a Western language or culture would. And so a lot of work was done to understand different language and different families, thanks to Franz. So his students put a lot of material and research into indigenous people about this place and about Coos Bay and other places up and down North America. So, where is this material now? Well, this is the National Archives. This is the Smithsonian. This is the University of Washington. And when I was doing my research on Milik, I had to go to all these places to get all the Milik material in order to study it. Because it wasn't just available at the Bandon Library. Where my cousin Chris Tanner worked. Does anyone know Chris? No, all right. Anyway, so we were looking at a language family map. And so what are languages or families of languages? So take a language family like Proto-Indo-European. So for those of you who don't know Proto-Indo-European, this is a big tree, right? So it's the parent language of English. So English is part of Germanic. So over there on the right-hand side are all the Germanic languages, and English is one of those branches of that tree. But Germanic is also related to Slavic, is also related to Romance languages, also related to Iranian, also related to Hindi, also related to Celtic and Albanian and Greek and so on. So Proto-Indo-European is this huge language family that we know about because you can go through back in time and you can say, where was the origin of this word? So the word for 1, 2, and 3 in English is similar to the word 1, 2, and 3 in Slavic or 1, 2, and 3 in Hindi. So we're all related in Proto-Indo-European. And it's one of the two main parents of most all of European languages. So Proto-Indo-European is a provable language family to a lot of major languages with huge dispersion over 5,000 years. So if you look at the map of Europe and Asia, you can see the spread of Proto-Indo-European in the color parts of this presentation. And Proto-Indo-European ancestors essentially went from Iceland to India, as well as from Portugal to Serbia. So that's how widespread Proto-Indo-European. It's a huge, huge, huge language family. So maybe you're asking yourself, well, who was there before the Proto-Indo-Europeans? Not something people usually ask, but let's say you were asking, who was there before the Proto-Indo-Europeans? Was it the Basque, right? So there is a language family called Basque that is an isolate between Spain and France. And the answer is no one knows, right? We don't know what language was there before Proto-Indo-European because people weren't recording things, just like here, right? So does Oregon have a language family map like the Europe and Asia one? And the answer is, of course. A U of O professor, Scott Delancey, there he is, made this wonderful language family map of Oregon. So you'll see that there's a lot of different language families here in Oregon. That's 10 different language families. So think about that again. Proto-Indo-European went all the way from Portugal to Siberia, from Iceland to India, but that's just one language family. And there are 10 language families just here on the Western Oregon side of the state. And of that, there are 44 different languages within those families, right? So compared to how many language families there are in Europe, there's one with Basque, there's two with Uralic, which is, Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, and then three is Proto-Indo-European. Well, what does that mean? That means that Europe is more homogeneous linguistically than Oregon. Maybe you already knew that. Oregon has more linguistic diversity than Europe. And if we zoom in to our little neck of the woods here, you'll see where Hannes and Milik are, and there's Milik circled. And Milik is part of the Coos language family. And I put an asterisk there because maybe Milik was America's Basque and Hannes is a Milik derivative. But let's say it's not, for the sake of argument, that Hannes is its Coos sister. So Coos is a language family unto itself. So the Basque of Oregon. And so for those of you who are Basque fans and a fashion fan, Balenciaga is a Basque fashion designer. We don't necessarily have our Oregon equivalent. But you'll see that Milik and Hannes in the map listed as Coos, whereas Coquel, which should be Upper Coquel, but it doesn't matter, belonging to the Dene family, is in this map. And they're right next to each other, right? So similar to Austria, which is Germanic, and Hungary, which is Uralic, completely different language families right next to each other. The same sort of thing is going on for Milik and Upper Coquel, Dene, or Nuea. So we call it Nuea, but on this map, he has it labeled Coquel. And, Coos is the family in the blue schist color, and Dene is in the royal blue, but that color is just too close because they're really very, 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 very different, right? And what's super interesting here are the patterns of settlement. So let's say you were a horse racing announcer, you would see, okay, the Aztecs are here in the green and they're coming up, they're spreading all over. Oh, no, the people in the Mississippi Valley are going up and doing all this thing. And then the Algic people are going there. And then the Danais are coming down. But, who's remaining at the end of the day? These languages on the coast. So if you think about the coast, you're living in a very special place because the coasts were not taken over by the major language families, just like the Basque weren't taken over by the Proto-Indo-Europeans, right? So we have these specialist languages here on the coast, which makes this whole idea very, very interesting. So if we harken back to our old slide, the slide of Amerindians. There's genetic evidence that the people who are in red here are related to each other through DNA, and the people in yellow here are related in DNA, and the people in purple are related in DNA. So there's genetic evidence that indigenous people arrived in waves, even though we don't know how the first wave got here. And likewise, there's the linguistic evidence as well. And my professor back at my alma mater, I won't say Stanford because I know this is probably an Oregon crowd, had a theory that, well, we'll just call all these languages Amerind. Well, despite his heroic efforts of trying to prove it, he was unable to. And so while there's good genetic evidence, the bridge was too far linguistically to prove that indeed we were related. So this map is about as close as we can to prove any similarity between these languages of the Americas. Well, what about the Dene? So you can see the Dene here in the cross hatch pattern up into Alaska and Canada, and you can see it down here in Navajo and Apache. But you can also see little bits of it in California and Oregon. What about the Dene? Weren't they new to the area? Well, yes, signs point to yes. And we know from informants like Annie Miner Peterson here with Melville Jacobs, and Frank Drew and Jim Buchanan and Hopewell Thompson, that the appearance of the Dene were relatively recent. So this blue incursion, if you will, is relatively recent. So if you're thinking that the settlers who came into this area were the second people, you're probably wrong, right? If it was the Aztecs who were trying to get in here, they would have been second, but they failed. If it was the Kalapuya folks from the Willamette who tried to get here, they couldn't extend into this area. They would have been second. And in fact, one of our linguists who studied Melic thought that it was from Salish, because there's some similarities between Melic and Salish. But again, that has remained unproved. So the triumphant newcomers, and newcomers is a relative term, remember the timeline, were the Dene people, what we call Nuea. So if you look at the time of contact, I put contact in quotes here, you can see where the Nuea and Dene languages were spoken in the royal blue. You can see where the Melic and Coos languages were spoken in the blue schist blue, and then the other language families throughout. Now, how did the Dene skip from just outside of the Columbia River down to here, then into Navajo and Apache? It's a really great question. I got to remember to breathe. So why did I put contact in quotes? Well, can anyone tell me what this is a chart of? Oh, no. So it's a chart of the indigenous population for the U.S. from the time of Columbus to 1900. So if we mark this from 1492 to 1900, we have one of the questions here, how many people were here? This gives you a sense. So where did all the indigenous people go? Well, you can see kind of the atrocities to Indian, quote unquote, homelands here on this thing where Indian people lived and then were taken and put on red reservations. So this is a map of the US through time that ends in 1891, but starts in 1810. So where were Indian people in 1810 up to 1891? And you kind of have to look quick because they disappear quickly. So, maybe you've heard of the Trail of Tears, which took people from, eastern US onto the lands of Oklahoma. Did that happen here in Oregon? Well, yes, it did. The same deal, right? So what was the native population over time, starting in 1805, and then what was the non-Indian population starting in 1841? And you can see a dramatic shift, and that was bad for our people. So between smallpox, death marches, concentration camps, there was 90% death for my Coquel ancestors. So when I put the term contact in quotes, that's why it's a euphemism for genocide. So that was terrible. And there were other atrocities too. It wasn't all just death marches and genocide. There was also the Nosoma massacre. So you'll see a memorial across the street, if you haven't been there, of the time where volunteers came and murdered people while they were sleeping in the morning here, right here in Bandon. So, you know, contact I put in quotes. But I digress. I promised to tell you more about Millik and how Millik took a nap. Oh, there's Millik taking a nap. No, it didn't take a nap. It was forcibly removed, kind of like the way this child is falling down. Oh, wait, it wasn't him falling down. He was pushed. So for those unkilled or dead from disease or genocide, they were put in boarding schools. Maybe you've heard about this boarding school thing, where they were taking the quote unquote godless heathens. Here is a picture of some Spokane children for a before and after picture. So this is the before picture when they're going into boarding school, and I'm going to pick out one of them. So I'm going to pick out her and turn them into God-fearing Christians. These are all quotes from the time. And so now that's her on the right-hand side, and that's the rest of them. So the before and after of the girl looks like this, right? This is you know, in the before going into the Marines and after becoming a Marine type thing. So the experience of this Spokane girl was replicated for my triple and double great grandparents. So aside from the genocide, the disease, and the boarding schools, we were also separated, politicized, and terminated. There's more about that here if you want to see me give a YouTube talk about that. And every attempt to erase us was used. You know, if it was the Black Knight, it's like, we'll call it a draw. But my cousin George, there he is. He was a doctor of anthropology from the University of Oregon. And he thought that the state of what we were left with as a people was so bad that his master's thesis is called The Cultural Black Hole of Southwestern Oregon Coast, because so much is missing, right? And don't get me wrong, you know, a lot of bad things happen, smallpox, boarding schools. Not only were we put in boarding schools, but after in 1954, the Eisenhower administration terminated the tribe with the Indian Termination Act. But, you know, George preferred to think of what we lost as a black hole, but I'm more of a fan of Swiss cheese. Any Face Rock Creamery fans out there? Okay, no. So here's some Swiss cheese. I don't need it for the holes, right? I don't need it for the holes. There are lots of holes in our culture and our records, but there's plenty of cheese. So there's all this gaps in understanding, sure, and a couple of genocides, boarding schools, and termination will do that to you. But again, there's a lot of cheese, and so what Reg and I have been working on is bringing the cheese together. About how our ancestors lived, spoke, prayed, practiced, and you know, we bring this knowledge back to the tribe. So Reg and I and others in the tribe and elsewhere are working to bring this knowledge back to the Coquel people, and our unique contribution really to the world's knowledge. So our ancestors gave us a worldview unlike any other perspective. The Millikan Nuea languages way of looking at things is very, very, very different than an English way. And, you know, our bones, our lives are still in these lands. So the river, the ocean, the land still holds our stories, as did our ancestors who recorded the words and songs. And bringing back our culture isn't easy, but we've made a really great start. So with that, I'll say tsutsewis, and we'll turn it over to any questions, and then Reg is, if you have questions now, feel free to ask, or we can have Reg tell you more. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. 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 So, really great question. The question was there evidence of people, coming here, from Oceania or, maybe by boat? And the answer is, we don't know. There is a hypothesis from John Erlandson, who talked about the Kelp Highway. And so the Kelp Highway would connect, give people the ability to move from Asia to the Americas or elsewhere to the Americas, by way of the Kelp Highway without needing to go through this giant ice problem. So yes, there is a hypothesis for that. Likewise, there's some DNA evidence, and the DNA evidence is like changing all the time. So it's completely unreliable for conclusions, but there is evidence that, maybe ancestry doesn't just move from Asia to the Americas. So, yeah. 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 I like that.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal history before I start talking. I was born in Myrtle Point in 1950. My family lived in Prosper, Oregon, in the Coquille River, and I spent most of my youth exploring the Coquille River. Little did I know that in 1900, Prosper was inhabited by almost as many Native Americans as Euro-Americans. But that whole story has been basically erased from history and from, I never heard anything about that, even though I lived there. But I did fall in love with that river at a very early age. And I've spent my whole life exploring all the different branches of the river and its unique topography and history. I am the original homeboy, as I never wanted to go anywhere else. I had opportunities to do archaeology in Central South America, and people said, well, why wouldn't you want to go there? I said, I was always more interested in this place, and I'm still more interested. I went away to college somewhat begrudgingly because I thought I was going to be a timber faller. My father decided something else for me, so I went to Linfield and Oregon State, got a degree in English, and started teaching school in Powers beginning. I'd always had an interest in archaeology and artifacts. My grandmother gave me a collection of arrowheads when I was very young. And I always wondered, well, can I find some more of these around here? And then I started teaching school in Powers and became friends with all these people there who were living on top of ancient village sites. And they started showing me all these things that they were finding, and I started going out and looking at all the landscapes around there. Worked as a logger for a couple of summers, got to see a lot of that country that other people haven't seen, and decided that, maybe I'd rather have a degree in archaeology than teach English the rest of my life. And so I went back to school at Oregon State and got a degree under a guy named Dick Ross, who was just starting to have a different attitude about archaeology. It was not typical for archaeologists to interview Native Americans and try to express the Native American view of history. And Dick Ross emphasized to all of us that we were actually working for Indian tribes. We were not working for the institution. We were working for Indian tribes, and that we should be listening to these people more than we had in the past. And I certainly embraced that viewpoint. And I got a degree from Oregon State and was hired by the Bureau of Land Management as an archaeologist in 1978. At that time, archaeology was not nearly as prominent as it is today. As a matter of fact, for a good part of my career, I was the only archaeologist on cruise camp. and met a lot of resistance from people that really didn't like the idea of archaeology getting in the way of the bone. But once I started working here, I found out that both the Confederated tribes, Confederate tribes of Tuslaw, Umpqua, and Sayuslaw, and the Coquel tribe were trying to get restored. They had lost their tribal identity through termination, and they wanted to be restored. And I worked with both of those tribes from the very beginning to try to get the tribes restored. Almost all of the people I worked with are gone now. And I can still remember every one of them and how passionate they were about trying to be recognized again. And I really felt like that was one of my responsibilities, was to do that. Sometimes the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, was not too enthused about that because they recognized that the tribes were going to be asking for land from the government. And I always have defended the rights of Native Americans to receive at least back some of the property that they had taken away from them in the past. My focus in archaeology has been more on understanding landscapes than anything else, probably because I love the land so much. So who better to study if you want to know about your own land than the Native Americans that have been here for thousands of years? So that's always been my focus. What does the landscape have to do with history and culture? How does it define people? And so for so often, we've been lumped here on the Coquille River with Coos Bay, and the archaeology is considered to be the same, but it is not. I've been on every branch of the Coquille River, on every ridge line between here and Agnes, and I know it like the back of my hand. And I can tell you there's huge differences between this river and the Coos Bay area. And that's really determined what these cultures here had going for them. In the beginning, I taught college classes at SWAT, and most of what I told my students at that time, I now know to be untrue. That's what archaeology is. It's constantly trying to develop new hypotheses that will help us to see the past more clearly. And I do really believe in that. It's really like a giant pyramid. And we're only at the middle of the pyramid right now, and there's so much more to learn. We're finding out now all about these things. One thing that you cannot deny, the upper river was occupied with the Dene people. The lower river was occupied with Millet people. They've been written about as two separate groups. But today they are combined together into the greater Coquel tribe. But they were always united. Anthropologists is trying to separate them, but how can you separate people that live on a river that is navigable for some 40 to 50 miles inland, like canoe? The upper Coquel people and the lower Coquel people have always been together. And it has been because of the resource base that we have here. For example, in the springtime, the lower river has access to more resources than the upper river does. Things like the pelagic bird populations, nesting on the offshore rocks, minus tides where people could access the mussel beds off the shore here, the migratory whales that were transiting up and down the coastline. And by the way, we have found evidence that Native Americans actually hunted whales here, not in the traditional way of thinking about it, but when whales come up along the shoreline, sometimes they get trapped in tide pools and the nearshore reefs, and they can actually be hunted with spears. And that is what happened here, which is that's the thing that excites me the most about this project, is learning about things that I would have never known before. Now my job is to convince you that I'm not crazy. And that could be a tall order for sure. So you got these lower river people who had resources that were abundant in the springtime and early summer. Massive runs of smelt and herring and anchovies. You know, we've always talked about how salmon were the most important resource here. That's not true. If you look at the weirs along the river, most of those weirs that were developed fish traps were developed for catching forage fish, not for salmon. And in the springtime, the river was full of those fish. Today, the Coquille has been so damaged by logging and agriculture that we've lost most of our fish populations here. But that was not the case originally. So the lower people were sitting on a large resource base in the spring and early summer. But as summer progressed, the upper river started to develop its own set of resources. The resources of the upper river were more like acorns from all the Savannah oak trees that grew there, tarweed, which was processed into seeds like oats, really important food source, hazelnuts, sugar pine nuts, just a wide variety of vegetable foods. And then in the fall, when salmon came into the river, they weren't that easy to catch down here. But when they got up to Myrtle Point, where the river is more narrow, it's a great place to take advantage of those fish runs. So the upper people had more food available to them in the late summer and fall than the lower people did. So what do? They have a river that connects the upper and the lower people together, and they shared their resources. I love studying mythology, and the upper Coquille people had so many myths about the importance of sharing food and what happens if you don't share food, if you're selfish. And those myths, to me, tell the true story of the people here. They were already united. For the last few thousand years, there's really been one Coquille tribe. They may have spoken two languages, but most of those people were bilingual, and they depended on each other. So the resources moved back and forth from the upper to the lower river. Nowhere else on the Oregon coast can you have a river that is so easily navigable all the way up into the interior as we have here. I love that river. I spend almost a good part of every year out there, just sitting there and going up and down the river in my boat, thinking about the people that live here. The river and the people are together. And I think it's great that the Coquille people have been given responsibility for trying to restore the salmon runs. That's always been an important part of their culture. But they need to remember that salmon were not here all in the past all the time. The salmon populations increased here about 1,000 years ago when we had another climate shift. We're seeing the effects of climate right now. It's becoming drier and hotter every summer. There are cycles of that kind of thing happening, and then there are cycles of coolness and rain. I believe in climate change to a certain extent, but I would say that we're in a natural cycle here that is exacerbated by all of us, but it's happened over and over again. And the impacts of that are that salmon populations would increase when there was increased rainfall and decrease when there was decreased rainfall. The reason why we have a problem now, especially because of the lack of rain. And when the rain will come back, and it probably won't be in my lifetime, the salmon will come back too. We have to believe in that. Now, I could talk about a lot of different subjects today, but perhaps I've aroused some interest in you, and you want to ask me some questions. So I think I'll stop at this point.
Well, and we had some other questions from the audience at the beginning. I think we answered this one. the population estimates for the Coquel people since the first people arrived? What is the estimate of the number of people who died from disease right before white settlers?
I can answer that to some extent. It probably originally there were about 1,500 people living on the entire Coquille River between the upper and lower Coquelles. But during the period after 1700, the population decreased dramatically. It started out with a horrible earthquake and tidal wave that wiped away the biggest village on the river, which was right here. We're sitting on top of it today. That village was destroyed, and the people had to move to different locations. But that tidal wave probably went all the way up as far as Myrtle Point and wiped out a lot of people. But then there was a double whammy when disease showed up with European explorers and trappers and that kind of thing. And another part of the population died because of disease. And then there was our ancestors who participated in genocidal acts that were even embarrassing to a lot of the people that came here in the early days. Especially the attack on the village on River Road, where William Packwood, whose grandson later became a U.S. senator, led a group of miners to destroy a village and killed most of the people there. So you add those three things up, and a lot of people died. I want to read something to you. This is what Coquel Thompson said. He said, "But now, all over the earth, there's nothing but the bones of our dead people. One cannot build a house on any point between here and the river. But what there are certain to be dead people, bones underneath here." That's the great challenge for Bandon today, is how much of this town is sitting on top of ancient Indian villages, and how we're going to deal with that issue. Are we going to desecrate those graves, or are we going to honor those people?
Well, one of the things that you mentioned was the village here. So you heard us refer to the term Nosoma before. So Nosoma was a collection of what you would call villages, but don't think of them as villages in that sense. They're kind of like autonomous governments, right? So the headman of a village was essentially the governor of that state. And there was, at the time the treaty was signed in 1855, there were 4 different village signers for that treaty as the Nosoma people. But as Fred just said, Nosoma, this place that you're sitting on right now, this village was destroyed in the 1700 tsunami. But there's evidence of this village existing for 3,000 years. In that period, a tsunami comes through every 300 to 500 years. So that village came back 5 or 6 times over the centuries, to give you a sense for how resilient the people were, even in the face of something like the tsunami.
That's right. There are a lot of natural cycles that we see here. There's the climatic cycles. There's the tectonic cycles. And we don't know anything about that because we've only been here for 200 years. And we killed most of the people who had a history of that in their genes, in their minds, and their stories. We wiped those people out. So we didn't know anything about that. We didn't even know that we had earthquake problems here, tidal wave problems here, until about 1990. And we now know that I think we're hearing some stories that are truly frightening about the size of potential tidal waves that hit this place. And yet we build our communities are built out along the river in flood zones where huge numbers of people are going to be wiped out. And we haven't acted like anything's going to change, that there's anything to it. And we're going to pay a price for that. You know, I was in Anchorage in 1964, and I saw what had happened up there during a giant earthquake. And they moved their community back away from the flood zones and left the shoreline as a park. We have the same potential here, you know, with the high ground that we have that we could build on. The interesting thing to me about history is that always repeats itself. Every aspect of history always repeats itself. There's no way you can escape that. That's the human condition. We're seeing it now in the political world today. I won't go into that, but you know what I'm talking about.
Is there politics? No, someone once said, if you look at all the problems in the US, it's almost as if it was built on top of an Indian burial ground. Speaking of political questions, we did have this one. Does the tribe have tribal land set aside? And the answer is multiple times that happened. So originally we were moved from here to Fort Umpqua, to Yachats, to Siletz, and so on. But our people came back again and again and again. But with regard to now, where is the tribe allowed to take land into trust? It's allowed to take it into any of its 5 county service area. So Coos, Curry, Douglas, Lane, Jackson. So does the tribe have land set aside? Some land is set aside. So Umnath Quathai, which is the name for Grandmother Rock, which is where Pacific View facility is right now, as well as the other question here was, when did the Mill Casino change its name? Very recently. Now it's the Coquel Casino, Coquel Casino Resort, Coos Bay, North Bend, and so on. And that's a recent change. And I really need to learn the name of the new name. But I know it's the Coquel Casino, something. So the other question that we had was,
Let me
please,
answer that.
yeah.
Actually, the tribe has acquired quite a bit of property in the last few years. They acquired 3,000 acres of land on Dry Creek on Sixes River. It's called Sequency. They have a reservation that from 5,000 acres from the BLM. There's potential for future reservation lands. The Coos Bay Wagon Road is probably up for grabs during the Trump administration. And the Coos Bay Wagon Road was used by the Coquel tribe. A lot of the evidence for that. And that's a property that could come back into tribal hands. I think over time you will see the Coquel tribe will acquire quite a bit of property. The way to protect things is to own them. You don't own them, you can't protect them. And the tribe has certainly embraced that concept.
One of the other questions was Bruce Anderson. Where is he now? He was such a mover in the tribe's economic development. Well, if you didn't realize, I am also an Anderson. I am the son of Bruce Anderson. Bruce Anderson is now in Roseburg. You know, he was responsible for putting the Pacific View Assisted Living Facility in place, along with myself, putting the what was then the Mill Casino in place, putting the Kilkittra Reservation in place, getting the Coquel Forest lands in place. We initially set up the cranberry bogs with the Reg's help on the Kilkittra Reservation. We put up, you know, all those things happened in the very short period of time that Bruce Anderson was leading the charge on the economic development. So That was a period of 92 to 96. But where is he now? He's happily retired in Roseburg.
Any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah. Oh. You want to go first?
You're talking about the Burnett property?
Yeah. Could you repeat the question?
The question is, what's gonna happen to that property across the street where it's a public parking area now? I can't speak for the tribe.
Well, right. So I was thinking you could take it from the archaeological perspective, and then I'll take it from the tribe political perspective.
Okay, well, at least probably, I'd say a quarter of that property is encumbered by a village site and probable grave sites. Which means that it probably is undevelopable at this time. Where it ends up, I don't know, but it's a really important thing to think about. How are we going to deal with these? Now that we have three major real estate development projects in Bandon. Gravel Point, Coquille Point, and that property across the street. How are those properties going to be developed so that we can work together with the Coquille tribe and not against the Coquille tribe?
Right. So the political answer is we defend very fiercely people on the ground, and we never want those areas disturbed. So the Coquille tribe would do everything in its power to ensure that the remains of ancestors are protected and not disturbed.
And just to make a point, though, this book is not going to talk about any of that. So we're going out on thin ice on our own here, because the book is going to talk about the past. And I'm probably going to try to draw the line at around 1900 and leave out the modern history for somebody else to deal with. There's more than enough to deal with 13,000 years of history.
Is that fine for your question? Okay. We had a question in the back. Right. So the question is, how much of this history is being taught to kids in the local area? And when I lived here, I was going into schools on a regular basis, giving in a different version of this kind of same presentation. And the kids are fascinated by this, but they aren't learning it. So a lot of this information is not being shared in the school system. Now, that said, when we get asked, we have people that go out into the schools and share. But the curriculum, usually for indigenous peoples is around Thanksgiving, sadly. And so usually when I would get called to go into a school, it was around Thanksgiving time. But that's still fine. The kids find this, I think, terribly fascinating and ask really fantastic questions. But with regard to the state of not just Coos County, but US, people don't know the history of the indigenous people who are here in general. So the question was, if you wanted to learn Mille, what are the resources? So yeah, so the first place to go would be www.miluk.org. So that is a site where my great-great-grandmother recorded words with a linguist called Morris Swadesh. And Morris Swadesh was trying to do the Proto-Indo-European language family for indigenous languages. And so he came through and interviewed my great-great-grandmother. And what I did is I took all that recording from that linguist and I put it online, word for word. So if you want to know the word for always, you can go there and you can hear her say the word for always. You can hear me say the word for always. You can hear my daughter say the word for always. And, you know, for all the words that he recorded from her are there. And that's just thing one. The other places is, you know, all those institutions I was telling you about before, University of Washington, the Smithsonian, National Archives, all that material is essentially public facing. So if you wanted to go pick up some Millick texts, you can. And the curriculum that we have for our own tribal members, we haven't really extended out to the community because there hasn't been an interest. But certainly, Millick is available to people who want to learn.
Just a comment on that, and that is that when we started this, you know, there was statements like this area is a black hole and there's no information on it. We don't know anything about the past, and we started digging. And we started finding stuff. And the first major discovery was the Swart collection. The tribe went back to Washington, D.C. and copied a lot of material from the National Archives. But that was only scratching the surface. There is so much more available. And it's kind of overwhelming, to me at least, to try to think of how do I condense all of this data into a book? It's going to be a real challenge because maybe you just hit the high point because there's just so much available. There's enough work for scholars for the next 100 years. And that would be my hope, that this is just the beginning of the quest for information and that the tribe will educate their own children and send them to colleges so that they can do the research to discover the past. My earnest hope when I started this job was that someday there would be tribal people who would be doing this and I would be fishing. And that's what I hope happens. And we're right close to it. We got Troy here now. And Justin, he's kind of going out and telling the story. And the tribe needs to tell its own story. We're doing a good job of it. And they really encourage education. I go to some of their celebrations and they honor the students all the way from the ones that have graduated from high school or from junior high to people that are getting PhDs. And the future of America is in education. The only hope that we have for moving forward. Let's not go backwards.
Well, and likewise, I can tell you, the reason I came to Millick in the first place was I was just interested in learning another language. I didn't know I had Millick roots. When I first started in 1986, I asked my grandmother, I said, hey, what language should we speak? She goes, I don't know. She said, talk to Sharon. Sharon Parrish was kind of a matriarch of our tribe. And so I went and asked Sharon, I'm like, you know, who speaks our language? She goes, I don't know. And so I just did my own research, started working on Millick, not knowing it was my ancestral language. For 2 years before I came across the tape in 1988 of my great-great-grandmother. So sometimes these things come to tribal members in interesting ways. You know, we hope to, you know, with this book, inspire tribal members to want to do exactly what Rich said is allow him to go fishing and not have to do all this. But you had a question.
Oh, yeah. First of all, thank you. Very thought. I have a question on the written state for Miller.
Yeah.
Which was, I guess, what you get, which doesn't look like what I usually see in linguistics, which is Roman letters plus the notes. What's the origin of this script?
Yeah, so the origin of this script is I didn't want to use Western alphabets as the basis. And so this is actually really easy to read once you know how to do it. So this is this kind of dolphin looking shape, if you will. is just your mouth. So if this first letter, it looks like a B with a dot and then a line above it, that's your mouth with your two lips together.
Split reading from left to right.
Left to right, yeah. So from left to right, so that is your mouth with your lips together, and the down line is your nose. So the two lips and the nose makes a M sound. Right? If you took out the line above, then it wouldn't be a voiced M, it would be an unvoiced M. So, and then the next one is the same shape as the first one, but without the lower lip. So that's mon. And then and then the three dots is glottal stop. And then the ya, so that Y sound is that line going down. And then the little tail going up on the end there is the hissing sound, right? So monit yas is how you would say that. And so basically I just wanted to take, the mouth shape, and I made a font for it, for Millet.
Your invention.
My invention, yes.
Beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
It's art too.
Appreciate it. Other questions? What didn't we tell them, Rich?
Well, I've got a lot of stuff here, but
Yeah.
we'll just keep it for the book.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we gotta have the book pitch.
Somebody raised their hand.
Oh. When is the book available, Reg?
It's an interesting process. So the manuscript will be delivered to the tribe, and the tribal council will review the manuscript. And, if it's approved, or if it's revised, it might then be publicized. Now, there are some things about this process that are confidential. Like, for example, locations of villages. We don't want to give anybody a road map to go out and destroy what's left of the tribe's information. And so sometimes what I might think is acceptable would not be acceptable by the tribes. So, and there's a process that these goes by.
And
Before it'll get there.
we work on it weekly, and about now we have about 180, 200 pages. 115 of those pages are still under review by the tribe. So we'll send the next batch here shortly. And then I would say we probably have another 40 to 60 pages.
Oh, please.
So that probably takes us to the end of the year. But again, needs to go through tribal approval. So you're getting the preview. But there's not too much more that we have to do, actually. What was the other question?
Somebody raised their hand back there in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Back to language, I have a friend who's a member of the tribe. And, my question is, do you think that will, enable, artificial intelligence, do you think that we'll ever get to the bottom of these things and discover, or are they lost forever?
So the question was, there's a lot of information still, just as Reg and I were talking about, hundreds of thousands of documents. I myself gathered about 45,000 documents personally, but there's more out there, right? The SORB collection is another 50,000 documents I haven't gone through, right? I've gone through a lot of them, but very little. And the question is, with the advance of AI, will we be able to do more with those documents? The answer is yes. So in 10 years, you might not need Regimu to go through documents and read and interpret and that sort of thing, because AI is increasing fast in its ability to do kind of work with words and language and writing and so on. But the other part of the question was, will it be able to give us better fidelity of the timeline going back since time immemorial. And I would say the answer is probably not, because while AI today is very good at hallucinating, so if you asked AI what happened 100,000 years ago, it'd probably tell you, but it'd be wrong. Whereas I think as AI progresses, it will hallucinate less, and it'll say, we can only know up to this point. All the available information is such, blah. That said, um, one of the thoughts was to put windmills out in the Pacific. Well, that could be on village sites, right? As we talked about, 400 feet deep down, it goes a long way out on the coast. And are there potential finds in those places that are out that far? Potentially. And so we could get some more answers than we have today. But will we get all the answers even with AI? No. A lot of stuff has been lost to time.
I'd like to comment on that for two things. One is that, we object to future projects in the ocean, the wind farms and that kind of thing. But there is a bright side to that too, because there will be new information gathered by the process of erecting those wind farms. I personally not in favor of it, but we learn more all the time because of these big projects. I worked on the LNG pipeline project for 3 years. We did a lot of core drilling out on the North Pit, and we learned a lot about climate change during that period of time. So I could see the positive aspect of the project, even though I was personally against it. The second thing is artificial intelligence. That is a real problem. Myself, I like the narratives. I like to put down on paper the words of people like Coquelle Thompson and Annie Miner Peterson and others. You can't take artificial intelligence and dissect that material. The voice of the human being is more powerful than anything that we can do artificially. So there's a limit to artificial intelligence, in my opinion.
Yeah, what Fred is saying as well is it brings up another important point is, and we didn't talk about it, which we could have, which was the trade that was going on even before the settlers arrived. And we know that in our archaeological sites that we've seen, there's obsidian. Well, there's not obsidian native to here. We've seen dentalium. Dentalium is not native to here. We've seen tobacco. Tobacco is not native to here. And so there are a lot of things that have, the Coquelle tribe traded with people that are outside of this area for resources that weren't here. And, one of the things that I showed you the picture of George Wasson earlier. He was very big on the traditional preparation of salmon in the ground, wrapping in seaweed and that sort of thing. And so I asked him one day, it's like, well, what do you think about aluminum foil? He goes, oh, well, my grandmother would have loved aluminum foil. She would have absolutely used it as a tool. So, the point is, AI is a tool, and it's a new tool. We had, John Henry trying to put steel spikes into the railroad faster than the steam engine. We had Paul Bunyan trying to chop down trees faster than the chainsaw. We're going to see the same thing happening with AI, but it's a tool, right? So to Reg's point, it's a very, very powerful tool and should be used wisely. We'll see what happens. It's still in its infancy, but it's going to be able to do a lot of things for us that will help us with our work. So the question was, what's the tradition of watercraft with the Coquelle tribe? And actually, we have an expert in the room, Justin. He is our canoe skipper for the tribe, or one of the canoe skippers for the tribe. And he's been, great at trying to build canoes for our people, as well as leading people in the proper practice of canoe. But there were many, many different types of canoes. There was like personal canoes, and there was ocean going canoes, and there were sport canoes. There was a wide variety of canoes. And as Reg said, one of the things that's kind of magical about the river here, the Coquel River, is that it's navigable. And it's navigable for miles and miles and miles, which is not the case. I don't think anywhere else, is it?
That's right, except the Columbia.
Yeah. But did you want to say anything more about?
Well, there were ocean-going canoes, there were river canoes, there were canoes that were traded from the Tillamook to here, there were canoes that were traded from the Tolowa and Yurok people to here. There were a wide variety of canoes, and it will be an endless debate that will last forever as to what was the right canoe. And I'm sure that Justin would agree with that, that we probably are never going to ever be able to know exactly what kind of canoe we choose here. There were a variety of canoes. As I was working on this program today, I was thinking about the river, and I wonder what was the earliest type of canoe that we had on this river. And I never have really thought about that. Well, that's going to be one of those things I'm going to be looking for information on. I would guess, though, that canoes probably came into vogue here several thousand years ago. And you're right, we're sitting on a unique river here. Rivers to the south, like Sixes River and the Elk River, you can't navigate very far up that. Even Coos River can't go very far up that. But you can go all the way up halfway to Powers, above Myrtle Point, in a canoe, or you could originally. The river's filled in a lot, so it's limited now to some extent. But at one time, you could go all the way up to Gravel Ford on the North Fork and to Gaylord on the South Fork. So you can just imagine how much of a highway that was for everybody that lived along it. And with what we see in terms of settlement patterns is that people lived along that highway. Just like if you drive down 101, there are stores all the way along 101, all the way down into California. The same thing on the river here. People were living along the river because that was the highway.
Go ahead. So the question was that the river has changed a lot over the years, and that what did the river look like before? And I think you want to talk about the delta and kind of the different shapes of the river over time.
Well, the river was a lot deeper originally. I was talking to Doug Cinco about his property up there at Myrtle Point, and he said at one time the bridge across the river there near his house was 7 feet deep, and now it's about 2 feet deep. That's a big change. The river has really eroded its banks and gradually become wider and shallower. That's one of the great challenges of the future, is going to be trying to maintain salmon populations in a river that has been so badly damaged. And I don't know, I really don't know what the answer is for that. And I know that nobody likes to tell a rancher or somebody that they can't do something that is hurting the river. But if we want fish, we're going to have to make some sacrifices. No question about it. You think the river ran clear all the way to the ocean?
Do you think the river ran clear all the way to the ocean?
Oh, I imagine it did. There wouldn't have been any reason for turbidity in the river. The banks were covered with vegetation, with trees. Matter of fact, some of the early accounts of traveling up the river make it sound like it was like a little Amazon going up the river, and the trees over the center of the river connected from either side. So it was like a tunnel. And you can imagine what that river must have looked like at that time. Compared to what it does now, it's only one tree wide. The riparian zone along both sides of the river, only one tree wide. That doesn't cut it when it comes to maintaining fish populations.
But one of the part of the answer to your question, we have in the first part of the book, which is the geology of the area and where we imagine that different events happen geologically, because we think it's really important for the landscape to not just portray the tsunamis and the fires and the earthquakes, but all the other shifts that have gone on. So stay tuned for that in the book. What was the question? Right. The question is, how many travel members are there? There's, I think, 1,225 some. Oh, 2,222. Wow, more than I thought. What, ask it again. I couldn't quite hear. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the question was, have we done oral histories with tribal members and that sort of thing? And the answer is yes. Over time, we've done a lot of oral histories. So, Bobby Hall did oral histories as part of Earthwatch in the mid-70s when Reg was getting his start. I was doing oral histories in the late 80s with my grandparents. And then even, 3 years ago, I was working with the CP Clusi tribe uh, through a grant to interview our elders for information. And, I can tell you that a lot of our elders knew a lot of things, right? So George Wasson, who I had up on the screen, he got a lot of the information directly from his parents. But other tribal members too, that you wouldn't think of as kind of the cultural stewards. They were exposed to things, and by my asking them or prompting the question, they came up with an answer. It's interesting. So when I first got that tape in 1988, I didn't know it was my great great grandmother, and it was from the Indiana School of Ethnomusicology. So I had sent away for the tape. I got the tape. I put it in the recorder. I pressed play. For those of you who are very young, you might not know what I'm talking about, but there used to be these things called tape recorders. Anyway, so sorry for that. So I pressed play and I realized this is my great great grandmother. After studying Miller for 2 years, so the first thing I did is I called my grandmother in Coos Bay and said, "Hey, I have a tape of your grandmother speaking Miller." She goes, "No, you don't." Actually, for my cousin, because he knows what she sounded like. "Oh, no, you don't. Try." Um, that's the way she would say it. And she lived at Heritage Place back when it was Heritage Place. Um, and so I said, "Oh, I'll bring it up." So I drove 10 hours, got to her house on Ross Inlet Salute, for those of you who know Coos Bay. And I did bring my tape recorder with me. And she goes, "Well, we don't have a tape recorder." Uh, well, fortunately or unfortunately, my grandmother's sister lived right next door, and her husband, who's also a tribal member, was blind. So he would get books on tape. We went out, walked over to his house, put the tape into the tape recorder, and she first starts speaking in English. And the girl goes, "That's her voice. That's her." It's the only recording of my grandmother's grandmother. And then she starts speaking Middle. She goes, "We had no idea that she knew this language." And my aunt, Gary's mother, Gary's sitting up there in the back through the chain link fence. His mother goes, "Oh, well, I knew." And we all, five of us turn and look at her and like, "What do you mean you knew?" She goes, "Oh, well, she used to take us out behind the house to tell us stories in Indian. We always thought it was funny, so we'd laugh." But, you know, that's a big part of the reason I think George was calling it the black hole, because those sort of stories didn't get passed down, right? So my great great grandmother was telling my aunts, you know, stories in Millet, and she was just laughing because it sounded funny, not realizing that, you know, this is a potential impart of information. But the more interesting part is that from 1914, when my grandmother was born, to 1961, when my great great grandmother died, that 47 years, she didn't share milk with her at all. And that was the power of the boarding schools and the prejudice. Other question? Come on, Robin, you got a question. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. You know, the sentiment was, for those of you who couldn't hear it, was, you know, a lot of our ancestors, including mine, were responsible for some of this decimation of my other ancestors. You know, what can we do? And one of the pleas that she made was education, right? Just this, listening to this sort of thing is a big help. So thank you all for being here. You know, again, thank Reg for taking a perspective as a local citizen, as a non-tribal member, to contribute so much to the Coquille tribe. He's done a phenomenal job. He's been completely respectful for decades. He and I go back to when I first started doing this in 1986. And, you know, we've been, you know, pairing off each other like this for a long time. So we're rehearsed. Um, but the nice thing is you have a living resource right here. And you know, Reg is extremely good about knowing everything that's in the ground, and he's been over every inch. And you know, my perspective seems more like academic and linguistic and cultural and spiritual. His is a good marriage. So it's been a good work marriage.
Yeah, this process of capturing information involves a lot of different disciplines. And as we progress forward, there's more disciplines involved. For example, genetics, DNA testing, all of these things are going to come into play. And who knows what's going to be coming up around the corner. I do believe in the future of science in this country. We need to invest in science for a lot of different reasons, for our health and for our understanding. And I'm looking forward to sitting on the sidelines in my declining years on a rocking chair, watching this move forward. I don't have to be a part of it. I've been a part of it. It's time to turn it over to somebody else.
Once you finish the book, Reg. Other questions? Yeah. When can you order the book? Yes,
That's to see about-
yeah,
I think I mentioned the fact that there's gonna be a vetting process. And this information belongs to the tribe. They will decide who gets to see the information. Some of it may not, like, for example, religious practices. We found out a lot of ceremonies and things that maybe they don't want to share with the public. So there will be things that will have to be omitted. But I think there will be some part of this that will come out to the public and be available. I hope so.
any other questions? Well, thank you all. And no questions online. All right, thanks so much.